to the New York City Workforce Drop. My name is Greg Morris. I'm the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Ooh, I'm excited about today's conversation. Andrew Rigie is here. He's going to dig in. Andrew Rigie is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, and he's going to dig in on New York City's hospitality economy. So we're going to dig into jobs. We're going to dig into policy, what it takes to operate a business in our city, what are the costs, what are the challenges, what are the amazing aspirations that exist to be able to make all of that possible. And he's going to highlight something I think is particularly important. He's going to talk about authenticity. He's going to talk about reputation. And he's going to talk about that in the context of representing a group of individuals. He represents the New York City Hospitality Alliance. I represent the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. The desire and interest of serving folks who are innovative and dynamic and are seeking day in and day out to either grow our economy, create pathways to opportunity, and in both cases is critical. And I think I, like Andrew, benefit from being able to start the conversation by saying, you know what? I remember what it was like when I was working to help young adults find jobs. And I remember, because of the work that I did, what it took and how it is that we thought about connecting public housing residents to better jobs. And I know that some of the tension of that. I recall the complexity of some of those challenges and opportunities that we were trying to help build for folks. So I feel like Andrew comes to the table and he talks about hospitality from the perspective of someone who believes in what hospitality means and wanting to see that in the current workforce and the future workforce and the opportunities that are associated with that. And, not for nothing, I think his investment in making sure that workforce, the workforce of the future, is embedded within hospitality opportunities in New York City is absolutely essential and benefits the folks, hopefully, that are working within our coalition. Once again, this is Andrew Rigie on New York City's hospitality economy. Andrew, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So here's the thing. I watch The Bear. Big fan. Hell's Kitchen, Top Chef. I assume I know everything about the restaurant industry because of that. I feel like I can open a restaurant today because I watch those shows. Fair? Unfair?
I mean, I encourage everyone who wants to open a restaurant to open up a restaurant. But,
right.
I say it's not even like a job working in the restaurant. It really is a lifestyle.
Right.
Especially when you own one 24/7, nights, weekends, holidays. You probably won't have much time left to watch.
Is that right? So that I wouldn't be able to see.
You wouldn't be able to watch all those shows. But, I'm sure you'll pick up something from the shows that you could apply to the restaurant that
It's
you're going to
just my assumption that whatever I see on television is real. And I love those shows. And I do cook, by the way. And we're going to dig into this, the New York City Hospitality Alliance. But I have to start with food and hospitality.
Yes.
Here's a starting point. And part of the reason for that is because we talked, you were at our conference in December.
I was.
And I really appreciated that. And you were there with our mutual friend, Randy Pierce.
Indeed.
Talking about the future of the city. And we'll dig into that in the sector and what's happening, where we see this administration going and how things are working. But I guess I just always start from the perspective with you on there are a lot of businesses in New York City. There are lots of restaurants, lots of different places in New York City. And the thing you said during the conference was you may think they're doing really well because you're trying to make a reservation and you can't get one. And you were like, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So maybe you could start a little bit here to tell us about the story of what's going on right now in the space that you represent with all the owners and businesses that you're connected to who are doing the work that I think we might watch on television and get a sense of, or we might like to go out and eat and enjoy, but behind the scenes what's really going on.
Yeah, listen, there are some restaurants that are so busy that it's nearly impossible to get a reservation.
Even for you.
Yes. It's different. We try. I always joke around when I go out to restaurants, like, yes, it's great because I go out and I know
Yeah.
a lot of people, but I'm also really like a restaurateur therapist. So I'm going out
Right.
someplace with my wife tonight, and we'll have dinner, and it'll be great. But I'm sure I'm going to hear from the owner, the chef, other people about all the challenges and
Right,
all
because
the
they're going to come at
problems.
you
Yeah.
about, because you represent, by the way, New York City Hospitality Alliance, how big is it?
So we represent thousands of
Thousands,
restaurants,
right.
bars, nightclubs across the 5 boroughs, from like your neighborhood diner to your 4-star restaurant to your pub to your nightclub, and kind of everything in between. But your exact question, there are about
There
25,000
it is.
eating and drinking establishments across the 5 boroughs, employing approximately 300,000 people from all walks of life. There are probably 50 or so restaurants that it is very, very difficult to get a reservation at. But then there are the 25,000 other places
Right.
that you could basically walk into, and it would not be as difficult to get a reservation.
And you mentioned and again, I think this is somewhat just context setting here for a second. You also mentioned at the conference that, and this was an interesting piece, because you had said, hey, look, the reality is not every business is doing well right now.
Yeah.
And there was even a note that said sometimes you don't even necessarily know when things open or close or the timing of that. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I start there because economically in New York City right now, in terms of where we are, I think this is a very tense moment for how well we're doing post-pandemic in this next stage of growth and development. How do we make it easy for folks to open businesses, keep businesses, et cetera? But I also get the sense sometimes we don't know how well folks are doing.
Yeah, there are so many challenges. New York City makes it very difficult to run a small business, not only just because there's all the competition, but because all the rules, regulations, fine fees, and all these different complexities. Just to put numbers in perspective, well, yes, you walk down a block and there are a lot of restaurants, and there's a lot of different pressures for that. I don't know if we'll get into all those reasons, but yes, the city is very food and beverage centric. However, over the past year, New York City restaurants have lost about 8,000 jobs. So, it's difficult to know exactly how many new restaurants have closed versus how many have opened. But what we do know is we have about 8,000 fewer jobs in the 5 boroughs in New York City restaurants and bars than compared to last year at the same time.
Do you have a sense of what types of jobs those are, or is that data
That's across.
tough to figure out? That's
it's
across
tough to know exactly. It is across the spectrum, both in full-service restaurants and in limited-service restaurants when you go up and you pay at the counter. So it runs the gamut from back-of-house jobs, what we call those are kitchen jobs. I like to say heart of the house, not just back of the house, and then the front-of-the-house jobs, which are servers, bartenders, and all those types of jobs.
I have to ask the question. Andrew, it's September 2018. You wrote an article, "The Rise of the Restaurant Robot."
Digging in the crates.
Listen,
there.
I want to make sure everybody knows I take this seriously. Here's my question to you. Is some of that job loss related to things you talked about? You were talking about the demise. You said, is this the rise of the robot, the demise of the restaurant server, chef, bartender? It was this idea of how does technology going to intersect with the hospitality industry. That's what you were talking about.
Yeah, and I think we've seen more and more technology adopted in limited service restaurants. You go and you see there are a whole bunch of screens where you place your order right on the screen, where in the past it may have been 5 people registers. Well, now there's 5 screens and 1 person to register if you need it. In full-service restaurants, which are the bulk of our members, it is more difficult to digitize because we are the hospitality industry. This is a human-first business where hospitality matters, and that's hard to replace with a robot. So there are specific ways technology, I think, is working alongside actual humans to help maybe with kind of repetitive tasks, certain types of cooking equipment. But I think it's very difficult for technology to just replace the restaurant industry, which is very, very important. However, we, being the Hospitality Alliance, represent full-service restaurants. And the more pressure that you put on these types of small businesses, the more you are going to push towards that limited service model where technology is replacing the actual person.
it's interesting. You were referencing hospitality as part of that and replacing the person. I am a listener of your podcast. You want to tell folks about your podcast, and also you've got content that you're putting out and great announcements to come in terms of additional sort of space that you're going to be broadcasting. Tell people about that, and then I'm going to highlight one of the episodes I listened to that was specifically about what it takes to run a restaurant and the relationship to humans.
Yes. So our show is called Hospitality and Politics. It's the intersection of the restaurant and nightlife industry and policy and food media. So we speak with chefs, restaurateurs. We speak with policy makers. We speak with nonprofits that are in the restaurant workforce hospitality space, as well as the food media, really for an insight into behind the scenes of the day-to-day operations of business and how it intersects with just New York City life and economy and culture at large.
And so I'm listening to the pod, and you're the first fellow podcaster I think I've sat across from in this setting.
That's amazing. Look at that.
This is so exciting. I'm doing this just to try to get on yours. That's
great.
All,
we're going to have to.
There's got to be a fair exchange.
There's a term for it. I forget what the term is. I should probably know it. Where podcasters like go back and forth on each other's shows.
Like we
cross promote, cross pod.
So cross pod. We're gonna capture the hashtag crosspod. That's what we're all about here. Speaking of hashtag crosspod, yes. I'm listening to your podcast and the woman, the founder, the owner of Melba's.
Yes, Melba Wilson.
I love it. And is like a personal friend of yours.
Yes.
And the two of you are clearly like just chatting. Mm-hmm. By the way, check out the podcast. It's amazing. But the two of you are just like chatting because you're friends. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the pandemic. You were talking about her role related to the Hospitality Alliance and those types of pieces. But I want to bring it back to customer service for a second because you said to her, it's a great question, something along the lines of, what is it like when you walk into your restaurant?
Yes.
And now, this is a serious restaurateur with tremendous history in her family. And you were like, what do you do when you walk in? And it was literally like, I look up at the lights. That's the first thing, because I want to know that everything can be seen. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And then I want to know how the places are set. Okay. And I want to see that. Then I want to see how people are interacting. And then she goes, then I zone in on the bathrooms.
Yes.
And then she said, and then at the end of the day, though, it's about my staff.
Yeah.
And does every member of my staff, does it look like they're having fun? Does it look like they're engaging people? And she said, I can't teach that. I can teach everything, but I can't teach that. Yeah. And is that something that with this technological future that we're in, I'm not speaking out against it, but that's got to be on your mind when you think about hospitality and how your businesses are thinking about that. I mean, look, everyone's got to save money, but you also got to touch your customers' feelings and space to be able to make them feel like this is a place they want to go.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that gives me my juice to fight and advocate for the industry and why I think it is just, such a wonderful, incredible, special, and important sector is this human element. There's a lot of products and services out there where the purchase of that product or service is a transaction. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. Mm-hmm. And that's just what it is. But there's something about full-service restaurants, bars, nightlife that has this human element where you're bringing people together at a table to share incredible cuisine that has a history, to share conversations, dates, families, business meetings, friends getting together. And one of the most important ways that a restaurateur can ensure people have a great experience is helping ensure that the people that are serving them, that are having those interactions, love what they're doing. And they really are there to make the person's experience special. And that's why when you speak with restaurateurs so often, they always talk about the culture that they're creating and the way that their servers, their bartenders are making other people feel, and I think that's why it's just such an important part that, you can teach people the technical skills, which are critically important. But there's an aspect because they're dealing with people from all walks of life that you need to make people feel good. You need to be responsive to them. And that's when you're hiring, does that person have that spark? If you were going out to celebrate a special occasion, would you want that person to be serving you? So it's sometimes difficult to put in words, but it's that feeling that someone gives you.
And I think Melba had said that too. It was like, I can tell when it is that someone has that interest in that, and I can also tell when they don't.
Yeah.
And in representing this Workforce Development Coalition, a significant percentage of our providers are in the training space, are in the hospitality food service space. They're trying to figure that out. It's been fascinating to watch how they have sought to pivot in some cases from solely back of the house type of jobs to how do we think about front of the house?
Yes.
How does a particular business think about cultivating management? So how do we help support that particular strategy? I think New York City and the Small Business Services First Course program was focused on some of that as well. Tell me, though, if we're in a position and we're in a time space where we're losing jobs potentially in the hospitality industry, in the space, what's the tension of this moment where we're teaching people for something, but do they actually have a landing spot?
So this is what's such a fascinating part of this conversation is that there are always jobs, thankfully, in restaurants and nightlife. I think it's the nature of the business where there are people more and more that are making it a career, but there are also people that work in the industry, particularly in front of house, as a place where they can usually make pretty good money working part-time while they're on their way to do something else, whether they're going to college, whether they're, on Broadway, whether they have another job and they're working in a restaurant to try to pick up some extra money. I think there is also this professionalization of the industry where people are coming from all different sectors to get in. And because the number of restaurants, there's a high turnover. The industry always seems to be hiring, and you're always looking for good people. Going back, having those skill sets, the right personality traits, that not only service but hospitality-focused mindset means that for people who are serious about getting into the industry, there's going to be opportunities for you, notwithstanding the challenges that the industry is facing. With that all being said, from our advocacy perspective, it is critically important that policymakers understand the fragility of the industry and these different challenges so they can enact policies that give these small businesses more sustainability, which in turn will give people working in these jobs more sustainability as well.
Well, on that note, I want to pivot to another article that came up. This is you in conversation with the food policy folks. Shout out to Darren Block, who's in the room with us today, hanging out in the pod, who flagged a quote from an interview you did with the food policy folks. This is you. It was specifically talking about public policy, pro-growth public policy, what the investment and promotion of the hospitality industry is. And you said something like this. There must be a fundamental change in the way government regulates and supports the restaurant industry, since labor and real estate are two major financial and operational influencers determining if a business will succeed. Let's pause there. Tell me about the necessary change. And we also heard this is the day where there's a handshake state agreement as well, which is also connected to you and some things you've been advocating for. So I'll pause there to say, tell me a little bit about this idea of what is the fundamental change that you think is needed? If there has been change that has been made, what can you champion? But also this intersection of labor and real estate, I'm sure is critically important.
Yes. I say this half jokingly that when policymakers ask, hey, what can we do to help restaurants and other small businesses? My answer sometimes is not, here's a policy to do something. It's more like, just stop doing certain things. So many of the challenges, I think, are government imposed, and that takes a shift. So it's not just what can we do to help, it's what can we stop doing to help? With that being said, I think we need to go from an education training mindset first and issuing fines and penalties as a last resort. What do I mean by that in practical terms? Basically, every single violation small business violation, there's thousands and thousands of them, that do not pose an immediate hazard to the public or to workers should allow a warning or a cure period before a fine is levied.
Give me an example.
So basically, the health department, there are many different violations that are not directly related to food safety, maybe related to, a sign that's supposed to be posted in one place and it's not, or something that's more administrative. Or you find this with aspects of the new outdoor dining law where a penalty is the first resort. What we have been saying is that you should be provided a cure period or a warning, which we've gotten some of these new laws and old ones on the books to now allow for, where a business has, say, 60 days to correct it, or many of these violations during inspection can be corrected right on the spot. But give the business owner an opportunity to fix the violation before a penalty is levied. And then the next time the inspector comes back, if it exists, well, then maybe it's more appropriate to give a penalty. But I think it changes the regulatory culture to one that focuses on education and training for the business. And it also creates a better working environment, I would think, for an inspector to go in and say, hey, small business owner, this is a violation. This is why it's a violation. And this is how to correct it. And you could correct it there on the spot, or if it's something that can't be corrected on the spot, you have a certain amount of time to fix it, submit evidence that you fixed it, and then there's no monetary penalty. And then the other side is looking at specific violations maybe that shouldn't exist in the first place. And that really takes a change in the regulatory culture. I think in business, you often talk like, what is the culture of that business? We were talking about workforce and hospitality and, hiring people that are people. Well, there's also a regulatory culture in government. And I think it has been for too long focused on red tape, fines as a way of compliance, and these other laws that are so complex where it's almost impossible for businesses to comply. There's actually a lot of workforce-related, labor law-related laws that are so complex that businesses find it very difficult to comply. Many of them, while they may be worker-focused, I think in certain ways have a negative effect on workers, and where even a minor violation of some technical labor law can result in major damages for the small business. And we all know in New York State, New York City, the cost of litigation is so expensive. So what small business owners end up doing, even if they think they maybe could win, they end up settling because the cost to litigate is so expensive. And in many of those cases, it may be correct. They may be technically in violation of this overly complicated law. It wasn't that there was like gross miscarriages of justice where there was like real abuse. It was more of the technical nature. So there's a lot of different examples, that you can go through. But I think it really takes people at the top to say we are going to fundamentally change the way that we regulate, we support our small businesses.
Can you give me a sense of, I'm always curious, what the conversation is really like? If someone from whatever department shows up at a restaurant or shows up at a small business bar, et cetera, and says, I'm walking, what happens exactly? This person shows up, I assume, unannounced.
Yes.
And then they are literally walking through the space with a checklist. Like, what is that really like? Because I don't know. Yes. I mean, I like every other person in New York City, I see signs on buildings. I see A grades, B grades, C. I see a lot of things. I don't know what that means. And to your point, I guarantee you most people, when they see a low grade, they think it's because something not so great is happening in that space. With the food probably is the starting point. But I'm just curious, what does it look like and what does it feel like? Are these conflictual conversations? These are exploratory At the end of the day, it's a violation if you're not meeting the expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it occurs on this great spectrum of the inspection experience. The inspector is supposed to arrive, announce themselves. It is unexpected, so the business doesn't know they're going to show up when they do. Sometimes they show up at a restaurant, which creates a lot of frustration in the middle of dinner service.
Right, they could show up in the middle.
So it could be Friday night at 8 p.m. when the kitchen is completely slammed, and all of a sudden the inspector is like on their hands and knees underneath the line with a flashlight looking for different violations and opening up the ice machine and looking if there's any debris and unscrewing things, and it completely disrupts the kitchen. The food doesn't come out properly. Sometimes the restaurant has to end up comping some of the food.
Right.
Those frontline workers, the servers, have to explain to the guests, we're really sorry, we're just a little bit delayed. There's a health department inspection going on, and then the people are like, oh my goodness, why is there a health department
Immediately, that's going to all kinds
so
of alarm
they're
bells.
thinking, no, this is just our normal inspection. But I also think there's probably challenges, and one of the things going back to what I said about having a warning or a cure period, if it is always built into the system, it means the inspector can go in first wearing their education, training, compliance hat as the lead-in. Because what happens is if 10 inspectors go out and then, 8 of them come back and they have all these violations from small businesses, but the 2 others have very few violations, supervisor's going to be like, what's going on? Did you not do your job? Are you on the take or something? No, maybe they were just looking at violations, being like, you know what, they can correct that right there. There's no reason to issue them a violation. They can correct it. And it can be a teaching moment. But unfortunately, that's not built into the system enough. So I think there's this uneasiness of what inspectors have to do when they walk to a business. But it can be very, very disruptive. Sometimes an inspector will just walk back into the kitchen and everyone's like, whoa, what's going on? Other times if it's for outdoor dining, you'll see an inspector walking by and maybe they're out there and they're taking photos and they're looking at things. And, people get nervous and they don't always know exactly, what to do, what to say, how to manage it. There's also one of the beauties of the industry is the diversity of it. So you have people from all backgrounds. Not English isn't everybody's first language. Mind you, sometimes the inspectors, English may not be their first language as well. Right. And there is misunderstandings. Not that anyone is, right or wrong. It just is people there may be some communication barriers in the overall experience, which can pose additional challenges.
Unannounced visits at this particular moment in our country's history, particularly fraught, I would suggest, for lots and lots of New Yorkers. What you were describing felt a little bit like Gordon Ramsay moments there, where and again, if you watch any of those programs. Some of that is we're going to improve this restaurant over and I love that we start by closing you down to educate you as opposed to let's talk about what works and what doesn't and how we can do better. And I think what you're trying to get at is how to inform when we're not talking about a crisis situation or urgent situation.
Years ago, it's gotten much better because our hospitality alliance has advocated successfully for a lot of positive small business reforms. It still happens, not close to as much, thankfully, where there would be these multi-agency raids on small businesses, shutting them down. I remember working with then New York City Speaker Christine Quinn, and who said, why is it that we can coordinate 9 agencies on a Friday night at 10 p.m. to go shut a business down, but we can't coordinate those same 8 or 9 agencies on a Monday at, say, 1 p.m. to go help the small business open up?
Look at that.
And it was such a just sharp way to put it in perspective.
That's right.
Let's get our priorities. If someone should be shut down, if there's a safety issue or something, by all means. But the vast majority of scenarios where businesses feel that government is treating them improperly are not those life and death emergency situations. They're just the normal course of doing business where some red tape, something is catching them up that could be dealt with, I think, in a more effective and efficient way.
I want to dig into, by the way, shout out to podcast guest Christine Quinn, who was here not too long ago. Much appreciation for her and how she thinks. I want to ask you about, I'm going to change hats for a second to my community board hat. You had Jeffrey LeFrancois on. I was listening to that podcast. Jeffrey is a legend in his own right in New York City. Is connected directly oversight of the meatpacking district. Fascinating podcast, by the way, because he was like, "What is a meatpacking?" It was helpful for me to dig into this. And I love your first question to him was, "Can you give me the actual geographic representation of the meatpacking district?" Which I thought was perfect because I was like, "I'm on this community board. I can't figure out where these things begin and end." Here's the reason I bring it up. I have sat in as part of the business licensing committee of the community board. So I have sat in these rooms where small business owners have come to the table through a process that they have to go through to get a liquor license or to change their operation hours, whether it's a nightclub situation and I have to shift my hours later, and what does that look like in my neighborhood, to the ownership of this particular business is now getting handed over to someone else, to the outdoor dining conversation. And it's not just outdoor, there's roadway dining and there's a lot of layers. And I have, with my colleagues on the community board, had a tape measure to measure how far it is that the rules and the guidance and the expectations for a business owner, small business in particular, to navigate. You've highlighted as this is not easy stuff. And also the idea of like how many watchdogs there are potentially looking and seeing whether things work or they're not, or they're following the expectations or guidelines, is significant. And in those meetings or in those convenings, those committee meetings and otherwise, I just thought to myself, if I'm a business owner, this must be extraordinarily taxing. Also, I don't remember many times folks showing up with teams. It was like the owner and their lawyer.
Yeah.
Is that the case when we talk about the majority of the folks that you represent? Is that these are such small shops, really? If I'm the owner, I'm running my business. We have my cooks. I have my staff. I assume maybe small. I'm thinking about front of the house, back of the house. I don't necessarily get to hand off who's dealing with the Wi-Fi to someone else. I have to deal with that while I'm also figuring out what's on my menu. Is that typical?
When we started this conversation, you talked about the restaurant food shows that you loved and that you want to open up a place.
I don't want to open up one, but I was watching thinking I must be able to because I watch them.
Well, many people, similar to you, end up taking the next crazy step.
Sure.
And they want to open up a place because they love food, they love people, and it's just something about this industry that is like in your DNA. As difficult as it is, there has to be something so wonderful about it for so many people to do it and persevere through the challenges. So you're spot on. Most of the people that go to open, just everyday people with a dream, and then they go to open these places and they can go to the community board and they think they're going to open this great business. We're going to be sourcing from this upstate farm. We're going to have this type of wine. We're going to have live music here for everyone to enjoy. And they go to the community board and they're cross-examined and they're almost like yelled at in some cases. They are. Out of the room, and they come totally unprepared for that type of intensive scrutiny. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm on a community board, too, and there's a lot of wonderful people serving. But in certain areas, it has become so difficult for a business to get a liquor license. And if you don't have a lawyer, or if you do, but you don't fully have the bandwidth, even if you do have the bandwidth, to navigate the complexities of this, you are handicapped from the beginning. And it poses a lot of challenges, and that's why you've seen in many cases the city that never sleeps going to bed much earlier. New York City, that was worldwide famous for our nightlife, is unfortunately in many ways in a decline. Live music in New York City, dancing in New York City has plummeted compared to back in the days. I mean, New York City has launched cultural, musical movements. Think about it. The Ramones, CBGBs, salsa. I mean, there's so many different. Bob Dylan. I mean, you can go hip hop. You can go on and you can go on and on and on. And one of the reasons that was nourished was because of our bars, our nightlife, our restaurants, and late night. And now it is nearly impossible to go, especially in certain neighborhoods, and say, I want a 4 a.m. Liquor license. The community board just won't approve it. And the way the system works, they have a lot of leverage. And we've seen more and more businesses have to agree to closing earlier, which has all different effects on culture, on the economy. So they're very interesting city planning conversations, cultural conversations. I mean, I was just at a nightlife conference in Nashville, and the state of Texas actually uses a portion of their alcohol excise tax in a rebate program that businesses, entertainment venues, and people hosting festivals can apply for to help support those businesses, create music events, create cultural events. So they are actively taking taxpayer dollars and reinvesting it in culture, in music, where unfortunately many of our laws are actually restricting people from dancing. We got the cabaret law repealed, which was an old racist law, going back to, post-prohibition. Then we had the zoning changes. We had zoning that was restricting where people could dance. I mean, that's like First Amendment free speech activity. And anyways, so these policies, without going too much into the weeds, are actually restricting live music, restricting dancing, and restricting other types of cultural expression, which create jobs, which create opportunities, and also attract people from around the globe to come here because they go, I want to be in New York City to experience all this.
And I want to give shout out and praise and love to all of my fellow community board members who are diligent and thoughtful, and in many cases sought to do the informing and educating.
Yes.
That said, it still creates additional layers of complexity in the life of a business owner. I've been involved in those conversations about 2 a.m. versus 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And when a business owner literally says, if I'm not open until 4, I don't see how it is that this business can exist here. Or I think I have every right to be able to have dancing here, but someone might say, but now here's where we go to the real estate market and this idea of, but this neighborhood isn't necessarily receptive to that. And there's this built-in tension in a city that is aging rapidly for a variety of different reasons, just in terms of demographics, et cetera. Also experiencing the widest sort of rich versus poor strands we've ever seen. And neighborhoods are undergoing the complexity of affordability challenges. So your point about, is the city hot right now? When I say hot, like a spot people want to come to, or is it kind of cooling, is an interesting question.
Yes.
And some folks will argue, no, it's hot as it's ever been. And other folks will say, not so sure. Yeah. But I think it feels a little bit like we're in a very interesting moment where we have to figure out how to maximize opportunity and comfort and security and affordability all at the same time. And I think the small business space in New York City is particularly critical at making all of that possible.
It is. And I mean, really just kind of going to the workforce, the restaurant industry is like a great equalizer. We employ people from all walks of life. It could be your first day and you arrive in America, in New York City. You don't even have to speak English. You can get a job in the restaurant industry. You could have been a lawyer at some, big firm and be like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I have a dream. I want to open up a restaurant. And you can go into the industry. And we employ and provide opportunities for everyone across the spectrum. But for small businesses, because full-service restaurants in particular are so labor-intensive, labor costs are the biggest expense. I was just speaking with a husband and wife team that own a small restaurant in Brooklyn. They were paying 46% of their sales annually towards labor costs. They just got rid of their general manager to try to reduce it, and now they're somewhere between 35 and 40%, which is the approximate labor cost. But think about that. That means for every dollar a restaurant is bringing in, they're spending 35 to 40 cents of that on labor costs because it is a labor-intensive business between front of house, back of house. And when policymakers are thinking about making policy, they have to understand how delicate that balance is because you want people to be paid fairly. You also want to ensure that businesses can afford to pay people, and particularly those smaller types of businesses that employ everyone, that are the ones that really add so much texture to our neighborhoods and so much culture and so much, why people say I love small businesses to our community, that they are the ones that can not only just survive, but hopefully in the future be able to thrive.
Yeah, the desire to ensure that a business is capable of sustaining itself, taking care of its workforce effectively, ensuring great product, whatever that is critical. We know, however, of course, there are lots of circumstances where not just regulatory issues, but other issues get in the way of those types of things. And I know that your desire for your industry is to excel in those ways. And thinking about what is getting in the way is so critical to you. I'm curious today, when this podcast drops, this will probably be a couple weeks removed here. Handshake agreement today on the state level, on the state budget. Any specific news to break on that from your end?
Well, there's a few things, but I think from a workforce perspective, something that's great is that the no tax on tips will apply to state income tax. So that means tipped workers will have up to, I believe it's $25,000 of their tip income not subject to state tax. Now that follows the federal policy. So that could be a lot of savings for a lot of workers in New York City and New York State who earn tips. And, that hopefully is then supporting them, but being spent out in, the neighborhood and helps additional economic activity. So that's really exciting. I think there's general support for it, and we're just hoping and waiting for it to be finalized.
Yeah, nothing signed, no signed deal yet, handshake agreement.
Yeah.
I like that we got to have the photo op with the handshake that happens. We got to get that in before we finalize. But the idea that, if we're in a moment where affordability is key, we've got to think about what wages mean, and we need to figure out how to compress the other costs of living, right?
Yeah.
So maximizing those dollars is certainly a value.
Absolutely.
You got to back up for me for a second,
Yes.
and we jumped in so much. I have to start by saying, how did this journey begin exactly? Family had a bakery?
Oh, going back to my great-grandparents, we had bakeries and cafes in Brooklyn and Queens. I grew up
What
there.
neighborhoods?
Went to so the ones in Brooklyn were before I was born, but they were Sheepshead Bay. We also had takeout Chinese restaurants. My dad, when
Really?
he was a young kid, was like the original delivery guy. He was a deliverista, I tell my friends.
He's a
for
deliverista,
the Chinese.
yeah.
So they'd close the bakery, and then they'd go over, and do the Chinese restaurant. My grandfather partnered with it. But the one that I grew up
Every
working
grandfather
at,
had a number of jobs.
You
I think
know.
every grandfather I know. It's a
they
lot
just,
of work.
Open stuff. Was in Queens and Howard Beach on Cross Bay Boulevard.
right?
And that Sugar Bun Bake Shop was there for 60-something years. It still is there, but my aunt sold it, I think in 2018. But that was kind of a rite of passage for everyone, to work. So I remember going into the bakery at 4:30 in the morning with my grandfather to
How old are you in this
roll
moment when you
rugelach.
4:30 a.m.?
Oh, like
how old are you?
5. 6.
So you're 5 or 6.
Yeah.
You come in. It's 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
The lights are coming on.
Yeah.
And what is your responsibility?
So usually I try to eat something. I always I liked an onion bun. I like to, egg and cheese on an onion bun.
That sounds fantastic.
But I would just kind of sit there, and then I'd roll rugelach, and then I'd do it with one hand. And my grandfather would be like, "What's the matter? Your other hand is broken." So I'd start rolling rugelach with 2 hands. Then maybe I'd take a nap on a bag of flour or something at some point, which now it's probably a health department.
I was going to say,
violation.
there's a violation.
Yeah.
Who's that kid in the back sleeping on the bed?
But that was back in the day. No, but I'd finish cakes. I helped do muffins. I fill cannolis. I was very good at filling cannolis.
Oh, I love a cannoli.
I'd smooth, the chocolate over the rainbow cookies. I put the sprinkles on stuff, cherries in the cookies. It's good stuff that
This
like
is
a kid
good
could
stuff
do.
to learn.
It was all very, very important. I listen. I saw there's a great. There's a show. It's like on Instagram. Not a show, but a guy does like the Subway stories where he asks.
The Subway Takes guy, that one?
Yeah. But there was a woman he interviewed. She said something to the extent of there should be like conscription. It should be a civic responsibility that everyone has to work in a restaurant. And I just think that is so true. You learn so much about hard work, working with different types of people. In intense, environments. You're also, if you're in front of the house, you're dealing with all different types of people. So I just think it's a great experience. And that's what I remember, because even after, the bakery, I always worked in restaurants and caterers and all different places. And I just felt that even while I'm still kind of in the industry, I'm not working in a restaurant, it taught me so many incredible life lessons that I've been able to carry through to the work that I do today. So I always think everybody, regardless of what you want to do, you should get a job in a restaurant at some point, because so many of those skills, both hard skills and soft skills, in countless different ways are transferable to what it is you may be doing in the future.
Durable skills, there's an element of repetition in
Yes.
that and focus in that. May I ask, your grandfather, how was he teaching you how to do things? Was it a matter of he was doing it and then he said, now you step in? Or what was the teaching process like?
Yeah, they would show a little bit. You know, it was a little generation. So my grandmother too. I always remember, like, my grandmother was, the boss of the front. My grandfather would always say about my grandma. He would always say, "Listen," her name was Barbara. Barbara, I'm the boss, but you make all the decisions. And that's what he always tells me. When I'm the boss, she makes all the decisions. So I would learn by, some showing me, watching, the other guys, do their thing, and then just being like, no, speed up. You got to do it this way, grunting. So that was kind of the education of just
curious
learning.
how it works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whenever we're young and we're exposed, especially as it relates to grandparents or older adults and how it is that
And
they
then a couple
show
of the guys, would sit and they'd show you, and you'd watch and you'd observe, and then you'd go and, try different things. It was really good. Like, I remember even the guys in the back, like, with the mixer. Baking also is different than cooking in the sense that it's a science.
Yeah.
So it really matters how much the measurements of what you're putting in. It's like a mathematical equation.
That's right.
I mean, there's certain things that are outside of kind of the mathematical equation and measurements. But so you do have to be very specific. You also have to realize that you're cranking stuff out, and it's that consistency. You said the repetition. So when you're rolling rucola, trays of rucola that you're preparing, and you want them all to be, the same size.
Yeah.
You have to have the same taste when they're going to the oven. The temperature. So you have to make sure things going in and being taken out at the right time. You also have to really start understanding business, what days are really busy, how much do you prepare for everything. I mean, my grandfather and my grandmother, I remember they had so much by like taste and feel. There's like a real art to all of it, knowing when something's done, the taste of everything. So even while baking is, yes, in many ways measurements, there is an aspect of like a taste and feel like, a cook would have. So a lot of it anyways with them showing me, and then you just doing it over and over and over. And, watching others. I remember, I was just talking about this recently with my wife. It was funny. But I remember when I was really young, I used to take a lot of buttercream from the cakes, and I would wipe it on my apron to make it look like I was one of the older bakers. And I was like, must have been working really hard.
Yeah, look at that.
You
Look
know
how hard
what I
this
mean?
guy's
Like, because
working.
I'd always think
Yeah.
like that showed that if you had like a lot of buttercream on a dirty apron,
right.
that meant you were working really hard.
That's
But they'd
exactly
like wrap the string around me like 8 times, so the apron would hold up. So, yeah.
It's you said, everyone should get the opportunity to work in that type of space. I think in the social services space, sometimes people say everyone needs an opportunity to work at a summer camp because you have to understand what it looks like and feels like in the sun with different groups of people, and we got to feed everybody on time. And these sort of things we have to expose ourselves to be able to help guide us and show us things. To understand something about time, understand something about performance, and getting that, like, if you're making something and what you make looks a different size, that's problematic. We have to fix that, and you don't get the luxury of just having someone buy, well, I'll take the smaller one. That's not the case. It's funny, though. I was telling a friend the other day, it's always been my dream to be a short order cook. Now, here's the thing. I have no skill set for that whatsoever. But I always thought about it, and part of it is because I watch videos online. These are my moments where I'm just zoning out, where I'm watching the guys with the GoPro cameras, and it's like a 7-hour YouTube clip of a guy just working in a kitchen, and I just mesmerized by it. It is my, what is that, ASMR? It just brings me to a place of zen, and I think, oh, that'd be great. And I mentioned that to someone who did work in a kitchen, and they were like, no, you do not want that job. You do not want that for a minute. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I would totally be able to do it, and it would be great for me to have. And you don't understand the rigor involved in that, and the stress and the strain and the timing and what you have to do and be. The upside of it was, I thought to myself, I get to make something.
Yeah.
And then I get to hand off the next thing and make the next thing. And sometimes in our work, it's hard to do.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's also, there's something about, for certain people, there is something about serving others that gives purpose.
Yeah.
And so many people that I hear, you mentioned the conversation I had with Melba and, the team and the interaction with people. There is something about being in the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, about making other people happy. You are in service to others. And I think that gives people a lot of meaning. And I think just when we talk about work in general, and you don't hear it as much anymore because maybe it's an old school saying, but like the dignity of work. And I think that work can be really hard, it can be challenging, but I believe it also can give us purpose and a sense of being. And people, if you find the right path and what you want to do, it can bring you a lot of joy, notwithstanding the hard work. And what's great about the restaurant industry is you get that immediate gratification. By making someone happy, coming out with a birthday cake that's surprising someone, looking out of the kitchen door and seeing someone eat what you just, cooked, and then going to the person next to them like, oh, you got to try this. This is so good, or someone comes in and they're having a great day and they sit up at the bar and you make them a drink and you talk with them and they walk out just feeling a little bit happier than they were when they first came in. And I think that's really, really special. And I think that the people that are working in the hospitality industry are doing like a civic good.
And I'll just add to that, the people who carry on the business traditions of their families as that happens over the course of time. I want to ask one question, then we'll do a lightning round. We'll wrap up here. But you run an organization that is focused on advocacy. You're representing a coalition. I represent a coalition.
Yes.
I recognize both the joy of that because I'm getting to work with the smartest, most dynamic, innovative thinkers imaginable. I'm getting to see them do what they do in amazing ways. I also, as you pointed out, I also know their frustrations and how much they share about how hard it is to be in the workforce development space for me. I imagine the same for you. I'm curious, what have you learned in terms of lessons about how to be an effective advocate? How do you think policy moves or changes? What's your orientation when you think about those expectations of you and your job?
One, I think you have to really care about the work you're doing. If you are representing people, it is much easier if you really care about them, because when you are out advocating for them, whether it's in the media or with government officials or any other stakeholder, your authenticity and passion to represent them because you care about their outcomes and what they're doing is critically important, as an advocate. I think also building a reputation for being a serious person, but also a likable person that you can work with is very, very important. You don't know what you don't know. You need to go in with the information that you do know. You have to be an expert in your field. You need to be connected with other experts in your field so you can clearly articulate not only what the problem is, because a lot of times policymakers are bombarded with this problem and that problem. Come with a problem and come with proposed solutions and a roadmap how to get it done. I always say, here is a policy this government agency could just change on their own. They don't need a law change. Here is a policy that could change that requires formal rulemaking, which has its own procedure. Here is a law that needs to be changed through the city council. And each one of those policy changes has a different roadmap to get done. So if you can go in there representing your stakeholders with a clear vision of what the issue is, how to fix it, and what the road is to get it fixed, that will make you effective. And then you need to just be out there working with a diverse coalition of stakeholders and building relationships. I mean, I've learned so much from the work that you do, going and listening to folks at your conference that I spoke at not too long ago is really helpful because it adds to the texture that allows you to better advocate for your constituents and stakeholders.
And if I could add one note to that, I would just say everything you said, so spot on, so right on. One of the mistakes I think sometimes folks make is saying, fix this because it's the right thing to do. And to our elected officials, policymakers, otherwise, it's you got to have the intersection of here's an actual problem, here's an actual solution, here's how we win together, and here's how we're going to show that we win. And that clarity is critical, and the authenticity of being able to talk about it matters a great deal. I appreciate that. Lightning round. Here it is. And now I'm going to reflect as well on this. I think this was a food policy interview. Again, this is just reflecting on this. Let's see if these things are still true for you. Someone asked you these questions before. Let's see if we match up.
Oh, no.
As a child, you wanted to be blank.
Oh, my goodness. What did I want to be? I still don't know what I want to be.
No one does. No one does.
My
We're
God.
all
Probably
searching.
on the Yankees.
100% on the Yankees or playing in the NBA.
There you go.
Look at that. You're 1 for 1.
Okay.
Is your motto, I'll just ask it this way. Is your motto still, don't talk about it, be about it?
Yeah, I was almost going to say that.
I knew that's
right
I knew you were
before.
going to. But I wanted to hear from you what
Yeah,
it means. What does that mean to you?
It's that people can talk and talk and talk, but talking is one thing. Being about it is actually getting something done. Don't complain about something unless you are going to come to the table and be part of the solution. And that's what it is. Everything should be action-oriented.
2 more. Last meal on Earth.
Did I say like steak?
Yes, you did. Whoa, this is
I'm
wildly
consistent.
impressive. This is from years ago.
I don't even know.
Oh, here's a good one. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Least healthy habit. It's related to food. I want to put a little asterisk on that for a second. Least healthy. This is food habit. I love blank, blank, blank.
I mean, I could just eat pint after pint of ice cream.
That is correct, but in this case, you said Entenmann's.
Oh, chocolate donuts. You know why? Because the only time we do that, so on New Year, we have like certain times where I'll go, I could eat a whole box of Entenmann's chocolate donuts. That definitely.
100%. There's no question. Speaking, you referenced the NBA. I was listening to Jalen Brunson was talking. Shout out to the New York Knicks on fire. Loving it right now. You know what his favorite? He was like Oreo cookies. He was on a podcast where he was like he found them. Like in the house.
Yeah.
His wife brought them and he was like in the house. And he was like, he said in the middle of the night he got up and he just, took them all.
Yeah.
He ate all, just an entire package of Oreo. We all have that. We have a thing.
Yeah. It's...
Listen, last thought here, and we don't have the time to dig into this at this particular moment. This will be a whole separate podcast, but I can't not close us out without talking about minimum wage.
Yes.
$30 an hour has been a topic that has come up a number of different times. Not lightning round here, but simply to say you had a point of view on this that you expressed during our conference, and it started, if I recall correctly, on the idea of we want people to have a wage that allows them to live. 30 sounds fantastic. That would have a pretty dramatic impact, you said at the time, on the small business space. We're now in a moment where we're talking about affordability. We're now in a space with this administration thinking about corporate responsibility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, economic justice. How do you feel about the $30 an hour wage?
You would absolutely devastate small business. Eliminating the tip credit for tipped workers and implementing a $30 minimum wage would cost more than $40,000 a year to employ each full-time tipped employee. So you're talking for a small restaurant, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a restaurant group, millions of dollars more a year in labor costs. I talk about this being a hospitality, human-centric business where you have human interactions. Well, if you really want to accelerate the use of touch screens and go to more limited service restaurants, fewer full-service restaurants, you should do that. And I think our policymakers really need to think about the cost of living like housing, because no matter what you increase the minimum wage to, it is not going to create a city where people can just afford to live here with, multiple kids and everything. There's housing, there's a lot of other issues. So yes, minimum wage is part of that conversation, but it is not the solution to everything. And what I would also say is we came to the table to negotiate the more recent minimum wage increases that we supported. We also supported indexing annual minimum wage increases to the rate of inflation. That way, workers on the lowest end of the wage spectrum get annual increases that are tied to economics, not tied to political whims every few years where there's a minimum wage increase. So I think it is a delicate balance, but a $30 minimum wage, just the math doesn't math, as they say. And you would take restaurants that are just teetering, even restaurants that are at the 5%, average profit margin, which is very small, and you would basically plummet them into maybe a 20% loss. So talk about the cost of living. To offset those costs, menu prices would significantly increase, making it even more expensive than it already is just to go out and get a meal at a local restaurant. So I think there are a lot of shock waves that sends through the local economy, particularly the small business economy. And it's a difficult issue, and I think it unfortunately puts small business owners in a very difficult position, because who wants to come out and say, I oppose increasing the minimum wage, but there is a reality to the economics, and sometimes that economic reality will just smash up against the budget and the P&L of a small business, and it just doesn't work.
I look forward to continuing. I feel like this is the first part of a number of conversations, the number of different sectors, industries, and otherwise that are focused on how it is that we think about wage increase, the impact of setting a marker that maybe have a direct impact on different businesses, the idea of how that intersects with corporate responsibility along with what affordability looks like, I think is essential. And I look forward to bringing you back with a number of other folks in the industry space to talk about this, because I think that you have a point of view, and others do too, as to how it is we get it right ultimately, that we can take care of our city, support our businesses, and continue on this journey of having the best New York City we can possibly have. Andrew, this has been an absolute pleasure. I just can't thank you enough for coming out and hanging out with us.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. Always a pleasure, and we'll have to have you on my show. And
okay, you heard it here. I'm expected to be. I look forward to doing that.
I'm going to look at my calendar right now.
Look at that. He's looking at his calendar right now. This is the best. Thank you so much,
Perfect.
sir. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
You.